This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Kelly Edwards. Tonight's top stories. China calls for restraint in the Gulf as the U.S. prepares a full naval blockade of all vessels entering or leaving Iranian ports. Tehran warns that it will enforce permanent control over the Strait of Hormuz. Now, oil prices jump back above $100 as hopes of a quick end to the war fade, and markets brace for a drawn-out and more complicated conflict. Meantime, ASEAN is urging Washington and Tehran to keep negotiating after weekend ceasefire talks failed, while calling for safe and uninterrupted transit through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Spain's Prime Minister is urging China to play a bigger role in global challenges, such as climate change and inequality, while also pushing Beijing to further open its markets, stressing on an unsustainable trade surplus it has with the EU. South Korea and Poland are ramping up defense ties as Warsaw expands military cooperation and rearming after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Poland's leader says he will personally oversee it.
The latest in AI is here at one of Hong Kong's biggest tech fairs, featuring companies from all around the world, from robots that dance and play music to healthcare and navigation solutions. Does the city have what it takes to become an AI development hub for the world? We'll unpack this in just a moment.
Plus, Artemis 2 was a major step in America's return to crewed lunar missions. But the race has already moved on. NASA targeting a moon landing by 2028. China wants theirs before 2030. We delve into this rivalry that could turn the lunar surface into a new arena of great power competition. U.S. President Donald Trump says that its ceasefire with Iran is, quote, holding well. The U.S. military is set to begin a naval blockade of all maritime traffic entering and exiting Iranian ports and coastal areas in less than 4 hours from now. Well, according to Mr. Trump, the U.S. military will also intercept ships in the Strait of Hormuz, specifically those that had paid Iran a toll to pass. But vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz to and from non-Iranian ports will be allowed through. Well, earlier, the American leader has warned that any Iranian who fires at the U.S. or peaceful vessels will be, quote, blown to hell, as he seeks to regain control of the vital waterway that carries 20% of the world's energy supply. Well, this all comes as talks between U.S. and Iranian delegations in Pakistan failed to reach a peace deal. Mr. Trump, meanwhile, says that he no longer cares if Iran comes back to the negotiating table. Iran's chief of Navy dismissed Washington's move as ridiculous, insisting Iran retains control of the Strait of Hormuz. The country's armed forces also called the restrictions illegal and constituting piracy. Now, a Bloomberg report says 2 oil tankers are now attempting to leave the Gulf by sailing close to the Iranian coast. They are the first vessels to do so since Washington announced the blockade plan. Well, across Asia, countries are taking steps to stabilize fuel prices and secure energy supplies. China, Iran's biggest crude buyer, is calling for de-escalation, urging for calm and restraint by all sides. For more, CNA's correspondent Han Sihui, she joins us live from Beijing. Sihui, first up, can we have China's reaction to the blockade?
Well, as you mentioned, it was a call for calm and restraint, and it signals China's position on the situation, that it wants to be seen as a responsible global actor and that it prioritizes stability over confrontation. And it also indirectly opposes the blockade without directly naming the U.S. Now, let's take a listen to the spokesperson at China's foreign ministry.
霍尔木兹海峡是重要的国际货物和能源贸易通道。 维护该地区的安全稳定和畅通，符合国际社会共同利益。海峡通航受阻的根源在于伊朗战事，解决这一问题的出路是尽快停火止战。各方应该保持冷静和克制，中方愿继续发挥积极建设性作用。
Well, some are wondering if China will intervene in the war, with reports citing U.S. intelligence suggesting that China is supplying Iran with weapons, including air defense systems. Well, so far, China has refuted this and calling it baseless smears, and they say that they follow strict export controls in accordance to domestic as well as international laws. Experts are also saying that China is unlikely to intervene in the war, instead observing the U.S. on the sidelines. And so far, we also see that China is pushing more on the diplomatic front, with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi making calls to several states and parties. And we also see that the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi and UAE, he is here in China and he's likely to discuss on the evolving situation. Also, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is also expected to make a 2-day visit from tomorrow here in China.
Well, China has called for calm and restraint, but in terms of impact that it could have on China, what are we looking here, especially when it comes to its energy needs?
Well, economists are telling me that the impact on China is going to be limited, and that's because of its recalibration of its energy supply strategy. So far, it has resumed U.S. oil and LNG imports. They've also increased Russian imports through Inner Mongolia. And really, they have to be vindicated due to the hundreds of billions of dollars of investments into renewables, making it a priority. 85% of its energy supply comes domestically through renewables, nuclear as well as coal. And also it has been building a unified domestic power market and making it more efficient energy supply system. But even so, even though it's largely insulated from oil shocks from this Iran war, it really is amplifying its existing economic challenges. So far, costs have been driven up. Producers are unwilling to pass on these costs to consumers due to already low domestic demands, and this could further push down its profit margins. And also, we've already seen gasoline prices raised 3 times by roughly a quarter since the Iran war began.
And many thanks for that report. CNA's correspondent Han Se-hui speaking to us live from Beijing. Now, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez is urging China to step up its global role, calling for Beijing to do more on climate change, security, defense, and inequality. Now, the Spanish premier made those comments during his 4th visit to China in 4 years in a bid to deepen economic ties. Now, Mr. Sanchez, in an address at Beijing's Tsinghua University, says that China should do more on global challenges. Now, these include climate action, public health, responsible artificial intelligence, and nuclear risks. He added that Europe must also redouble its efforts, especially as the U.S. pulls back from leadership roles on many fronts. Trade remains a major concern. The Spanish premier described China's trade imbalance with the European Union as, quote, unsustainable, and urged Beijing to open its markets, warning that its current deficit is growing and cannot last. Well, Spain's own deficit with China makes up for 74% of its total trade gap. Now, Mr. Sanchez also defended scientific collaboration with China, saying that cooperation strengthens research. This as he received an honorary professorship from the University of Chinese Academy of Sciences in Beijing. The Spanish premier highlighted the SMILE mission between China and Europe. Now, that's a joint effort to map Earth's magnetosphere and improve space weather forecasting.
Spain and China will continue to work side by side, advancing knowledge for the common good. That is the path we believe in, and that is the future we want to build.
The Spanish Prime Minister is set to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang tomorrow. Chinese state media says that the visit could strengthen ties and offer a path for steady China-Europe engagement amid global uncertainty. Now, Spain is seeking greater access for its agricultural and industrial goods while exploring partnerships in the technology sector. The trip also aims to attract investment into Spain and secure access to China's critical raw materials. Now, South Korea and Poland have agreed to upgrade ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership, with its leaders placing an expanded defense cooperation at the center of the relationship.
Siłą napędową naszych relacji dwustronnych jest oczywiście współpraca przemysłów zbrojeniowych, którą chcemy kontynuować i wzmacniać w kierunku transferu technologii, polonizacji nabywanego uzbrojenia oraz przenoszenia części produkcji do Polski.
The developments come as President Lee Jae-myung meets Prime Minister Donald Tusk in Seoul today. Mr. Tusk says South Korea is Poland's most important ally after the US, especially in the defense industry. The Polish leader says that he will personally oversee their expanded defense cooperation. He says the upgraded partnership means that both countries should play a role in contributing to global peace and stability. Mr. Lee says the partnership extends beyond arms sales to include joint production, technology transfers and training.
저는 양국 간의 방산 협력이 심화 발전할 수 있도록 이미 체결한 총괄 계약의 안정적 이행이 필요하다고 말씀드렸습니다. 총리께서도 방산 협력의 중요성에 깊이 공감하며 한국 기업이 보여준 현지 생산, 기술 이전, 인력 양성에 대한 노력을 높이 평가해 주셨습니다.
South Korea has become one of Poland's leading arms suppliers as Warsaw modernizes its military following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The two sides signed a $44 billion defense agreement in 2022 for South Korean companies to supply Poland with tanks and missile launchers and jointly produce military equipment in Poland. Now, besides defense, the two countries are also looking to set up direct flights and expand cooperation on energy supply chains, advanced industries, and space. But time now for a short break, but coming up on East Asia tonight. Saudi Arabia's crude oil sales to China set to halve next month as the war in the Middle East upends flows and lifts prices. Plus, Japan stops accepting new foreign workers in its food services sector from today, despite an acute labor shortage. We'll look at what's driving that move. Hello again. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and it is now time for your business news with Roland Lim. So, Roland Lim, let's talk about President Trump's threats. Once again, his talk of mounting a blockade of the strait, apparently doing a number on the markets today.
Yeah, the mood has shifted negatively once again after talks broke down over the weekend. The rise in oil prices has also revived fears of stagflationary shock, sending Asian shares lower. Optimism is unwinding here in the region after the US-Iran talks ended with no breakthrough. Energy supply also set to get even tighter after Mr. Trump threatened to block the few ships allowed passage through the Strait of Hormuz. The uncertain outlook has sent investors to seek relative safety in the US dollar. But rising oil-driven inflation and the expectation of tighter BOJ policies pushing Japanese government bond yields to their highest levels in 29 years. While prices have surged about 8% to above $100, that's on worries the heightened conflict could tighten energy supplies further. Mr. Trump's blockade threatens to cut off the remaining Iranian linked flows of up to 2 million barrels a day through the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia said that it has restored capacity through its east-west pipeline to about 7 million barrels a day. Now, the pipeline has been recovered after damage from attacks forced it to cut off oil supply capacity. Now, it's the only way the country can export crude oil out of the Strait of Hormuz, still being blocked. Before Mr. Trump's latest blockade announcement, JP Morgan analysts expected oil prices to stay above $100 a barrel in the second quarter before easing in the second half of the year. The reversal in energy prices is pushing down airline stocks in Asia. Fuel, of course, is the biggest cost to the airlines, and carriers are also dealing with disrupted air routes. Biggest percentage loser, China Eastern, down 4.3%. As for the broader China market, sentiment is mixed against the selling in the rest of the region. Mr. Trump threatened 50% tariffs on countries supplying weapons to Iran, including China. Saudi Arabia's crude sales to China reportedly set to fall sharply next month as the war in the Middle East disrupts oil flows and pushes up prices. Our traders say the kingdom is expected to ship about 20 million barrels to Chinese buyers in the month of May. And that's roughly half of the 40 million barrels allocated for April to its biggest buyer. The drop comes after Saudi Aramco, the world's largest oil exporter, raised its official selling prices to a record following the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz. While Saudi Arabia can still export oil through the Yanbu terminal on the Red Sea, the route cannot fully replace volumes normally shipped through the Gulf. Now, Yanbu can handle about 5 million barrels a day compared to the 7.2 million barrels Saudi Arabia was exporting before the war. Now, traders also say Asian refiners were only offered Arab light crude through the Red Sea port, while benchmark Dubai and Oman prices have turned increasingly volatile. Saul Kavonik, head of energy research at MST Marquee, shares his forecast for oil prices amid the ongoing uncertainty in the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, the market's basically returning to the pre-ceasefire conditions where we're back on an escalatory trajectory. The difference now is that the residual 1 to 2 million barrels a day of Iranian flows that were still making its way out of the Strait now risk being hampered by the Trump blockade on all Iranian ports. But I think perhaps more importantly, it does look like we could see the conflict begin again as well. There's still an influx of military build-up by the US into the Middle East. And so we're back on that escalatory pathway, both for the conflict, but also for energy markets. And so it's essentially back to where we were a little over a week ago, but the market is now short another 80 to 90 million barrels of oil, which has been lost over that period. And now that there's no light on the end of the horizon to the volumes through the Strait returning. So I think we're going to see oil continue to grind higher over the coming weeks and days unless we see a surprise de-escalatory pathway emerge.
InnoX, one of Asia's largest tech expos, opened in Hong Kong today. The 4-day event will bring together over 2,800 exhibitors from 27 countries and regions, showcasing global innovations, cutting-edge electronics, and advanced tech solutions. Robots are a key focus at this year's fair, with more than 100 on display across industrial, healthcare, and entertainment applications at the Robo Park. Another highlight is the low-altitude economy, with a conference held for the first time bringing together industry experts to examine policy trends and market potential. Now let's go over live to CNA's Geraldine Yap. She's at the event in Hong Kong. Jerry, tell us more about what's actually on showcase at the fair.
Well, Roland, we've seen some quite interesting robots here on display at the fair so far. They include a trio of humanoid robots outside the fair, that were programmed to dance in sync. And these robots actually look quite similar to actual human beings, although, the movement might be a bit robotic. We also have seen some robots that have been programmed to play musical instruments. So, for example, there were some robots playing the piano. And, more significantly, I think there were two robots that stood out to me that, they were playing the flute. I asked the developers, because, I think one question on everyone's mind is what, apart from providing entertainment, what could these robots be used for? So I asked the developers, and they told me that the fact that these robots can be programmed to play wind instruments, to play the flute, this is something that requires a high level of dexterity. And the fact that these robots can be programmed to play the flute shows the level of dexterity that the robots are able to achieve. And this also shows the potential of these robots. So, for example, apart from just playing musical instruments, these robots can be programmed to perform other functions in, for example, manufacturing, in healthcare, in logistics. So these are some of the sort of real-life use cases that could potentially, we could potentially see these robots performing. Now, apart from these flashy robots, we also did see some of the other AI technologies being showcased in areas like preventive healthcare, for example. So one of the devices that I saw a demonstration of was a small little device that you can use to perform a scan of your artery, and it actually can do an ultrasound scan to see if there is any blockage in the artery, and then that scan is fed through an AI program to then assess if there is a risk of cardiovascular disease. So the developers were telling me that at this point, a doctor is still required to do these scans and to perform the diagnosis, but they are hoping that one day they will be able to get to a stage where these devices can then be rolled out to community centers, for example, where volunteers and social workers can use these devices to help the elderly perform some of these preventive healthcare screenings.
So lots of applications there in terms of industrial usage as well as medtech. But speaking of AI, now Hong Kong gunning to be an AI hub, given the current geopolitical climate, though, the Iran war hitting. Is it hitting Hong Kong's AI development goals?
So I think the short answer is no. I've spoken to some businesses and some industry players here, and they tell me that so far they haven't really been affected by the conflict in Iran. And they also see that there are a lot of opportunities and synergies that lie in Shenzhen and in mainland China. So, the proximity to mainland China actually presents a lot of opportunities for these businesses. And I think the Hong Kong government is also quite optimistic about AI development in the city. Just earlier today, Hong Kong Chief Executive John Lee, he reiterated the government's commitment to accelerating the development of innovation and technology in the city. I think over the years, the Hong Kong government has been ramping up investments in AI development, and they are continuing to do so. And today, the chief executive, he said in a speech at a separate event that one of the key priorities for the government now is to boost the computing power in the city. And so there is an upcoming data facility cluster in the new Northern Metropolis development that is up in the north near the border with Shenzhen. And that new facility is expected to boost the city's computing power by 36 times by the year 2032. So I think all of this is also, of course, happening at a time when Hong Kong's exchange it continues to experience a boom in the public listings of AI and tech-related companies, especially from mainland China. So I think, according to the Hong Kong Exchange, they say that there are around 20 of these companies across the AI value chain that are in the pipeline. So I think we will continue to see some of these companies, come to Hong Kong to seek that sort of funding for their developments.
Jerry, appreciate the live report. That was Jerry Up reporting live from InnoX in Hong Kong. And that'll do it for Business Oteli.
Thanks so much for that, Roland. Now, we are going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, China congratulating Hungary's new leader, Peter Magyar, after his landslide election victory brought an end to 16 years of Viktor Orban's rule. With Orban having drawn Hungary closer to Beijing, we'll look at what this shift could mean for the relationship. Plus, China hits back at the Philippines over allegations of cyanide use in the South China Sea, accusing Manila of staging a self-directed farce. Hello there, this is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. China urges calm as tensions rise in the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. says it will begin a naval blockade of Iranian ports in just a few hours following failed talks with Iran. Tehran calls the move piracy and warns it will enforce permanent control over the key waterway. Now, oil prices, meantime, jump back above $100 a barrel, pushing stocks lower as hopes of a quick end to a war fade. And ASEAN foreign ministers urged the U.S. and Iran to resume talks for a lasting resolution, calling for full ceasefire implementation and safe passage in the Strait of Hormuz. European leaders are heaping praise on Hungary's opposition leader, Peter Magyar, after his stunning election victory. Many frustrated with Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who has consistently blocked European assistance to Ukraine and worked to water down sanctions on Russia. Well, that sentiment perhaps best captured by Poland's Prime Minister, who wrote on X that it's a glorious victory for Hungary and Europe to be back together, adding in Hungarian, "Russians go home," a popular chant at this election campaign. The preliminary results put the TISA party on course for 138 seats. Now, that's more than a two-thirds majority in parliament. Mr. Orban has warned that Hungary faces danger if he loses. Well, under his leadership, Russia has committed to supplying energy, and China has made major investments, including in electric vehicle and battery plants. Well, for more, let's bring in Ross Cullen, who is covering the story for CNA in Paris. Ross, Prime Minister Viktor Orban, well, he's been one of China's closest partners in the EU. So how would a new leadership that's promising change shake up ties with Beijing?
Yeah, that's right, Telly. We've seen huge investment from China into Hungary under the 16 years of the premiership of Viktor Orban, which has now come to a close with that landslide electoral victory for Peter Magyar and his TISA party. We can expect perhaps more caution when it comes to the avowedly pro-China outlook of the outgoing Orban government, but it's unlikely there would be a change to, for example, the investment streams that have already been agreed. For example, the enormous BYD electric vehicle manufacturing plant in the south of Hungary. Huge investment there from the Chinese company. Trial production already took place earlier this year, and they're hoping for full production to get underway later in 2026. A lot of green tech and green transport investment from China. But overall, there's been a real focus by Peter Magyar on the domestic side of this campaign to fight corruption and cronyism and try to improve the economic picture, healthcare and education for Hungarians. There will obviously be foreign policy ramifications as well. We'll have to wait a little bit longer to get a clear sense of where he would like the Budapest-Beijing relationship to be in the years to come.
And Ross, what about relations with the EU? Because Peter Magyar, he's promised to repair relations with them. What do we expect to change, and what could possibly stay the same?
Yeah, just after Viktor Orban conceded last night, Sunday night, Hungarian time, we had the statement from Peter Magyar. And no sooner had that happened than European leaders got on the phone, very excited to congratulate the new leader. The French President Emmanuel Macron spoke to Mr. Magyar, as did the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk as well. They are hoping for a less confrontational approach from Budapest in EU meetings going forward, because they certainly believe that Viktor Orban has been obstructive over the last few years, repeatedly blocking statements and resolutions, directives aimed at, for example, supporting Ukraine. They want to see that funding that Viktor Orban has blocked unlocked for Ukraine. They would also like the possibility to potentially unlock those frozen funds they stopped from going to Budapest. That's what Peter Magyar would like to see. EU funds for Budapest unlocked and unfrozen, committing to restoring judicial checks and balances, which was some of the reasons why the EU was reticent to provide further streams of investment to Hungary. Atali.
Well, always good speaking with you. Thanks so much for that update. Ross Cullen for CNA live in Paris. Well, ASEAN is urging the US and Iran to continue negotiations for a permanent end to the conflict after talks over the weekend failed to yield a deal. Well, the remarks made in a joint statement issued by the bloc's foreign ministers following a virtual meeting. Officials, as they welcomed the 2-week ceasefire between Washington and Tehran, called for its full and effective implementation and urged for the restoration of safe, unimpeded and continuous transit through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the remarks following the announcement by U.S. President Donald Trump on plans to implement a full blockade of the key waterway in less than 4 hours' time. And for more, we are joined now by Marie-Jo Ramos, who is covering this story for us from Manila. So, Marie-Jo, a press conference, I believe, was held following the foreign minister's virtual meeting over the escalating crisis in the Middle East. What came out of it?
Yes, maritime and food security, energy stability, and humanitarian protection are the key themes in the discussion of ASEAN foreign ministers today, following the declaration of a 2-week ceasefire between the US and Iran and the collapse of the peace talks between the two countries in Pakistan. Now, the ASEAN foreign ministers first had an exchange of views on the escalation of conflict in the Middle East through a special online meeting on March 13, convened by the Philippines, the chair of the ASEAN, where they expressed serious concern over the situation and called on all countries to respect international law. The foreign ministers welcomed the April 8 ceasefire in a statement issued ahead of their special meeting today, but the regional bloc stressed the urgency of sustaining the truce, calling for a full and effective implementation to avoid further loss of life and limit disruptions to global trade and energy flows. In a press conference following the virtual meeting, the Philippines Foreign Minister Maria Teresa Lazaro said they are looking to enhance information sharing on supply disruptions and policy responses. She highlighted the potential establishment of an ASEAN Foreign Ministers Crisis Communications Protocol, which can provide rapid consultations and information sharing during crises, and emphasize also the strengthening of cooperation in the region through frameworks like the ASEAN Power Grid and the ASEAN Petroleum Security Agreement, which allows for petroleum sharing and introducing joint emergency response measures.
Also, Marie-Jo, we know that governments in Southeast Asia, well, they have been implementing emergency measures to basically help their nations weather through this energy crisis. But what about the bloc as a whole? I mean, are they planning any?
That's right. The virtual meetings highlighted ASEAN's long-standing principle for dialogue over confrontation. Central to ASEAN's concern is the security of the Strait of Hormuz, where ministers push for the safe, unimpeded, and continuous transit of vessels and aircraft in line with international law, warning that prolonged instability could ripple across supply chains and economic stability worldwide. Now, the Philippines had been looking for ways to augment the oil supply gap domestically and has declared a national energy emergency last month. And as it looks for alternative fuel sources, tensions are mounting over renewed talks on joint oil and gas exploration between the Philippines and China, which critics said would mark a departure from how other Southeast Asian countries assert their maritime rights. But beyond immediate de-escalation and introducing emergency measures during this conflict, we can also see a broader diplomatic stance for the ASEAN leaders, for the ASEAN foreign ministers, who will meet face-to-face next month in the Philippines, ultimately urging US and Iran to pursue negotiations toward a permanent end of the conflict and lasting peace and stability.
Many thanks for that report. Marie-Jo Ramos for CNA speaking to us live from Manila. Now, China accuses the Philippines of staging what it calls a self-directed fast over the alleged use of cyanide, a potentially deadly chemical, by Chinese fishermen in the South China Sea. Well, the Philippine National Security Council earlier said that it had confirmed at least 2 dumping incidents based on samples seized from Chinese maritime militia ships. Now, cyanide was detected from bottles taken off Ayunjin or 2nd Thomas Shoal in February and October last year. Further investigations showed that the tested level of cyanide was more than enough to harm not just the fish population and the reef, but also people. The Philippine Navy says it believes the incidents were deliberate attempts to destroy the environment and to deprive the men on board a BRP Sierra Madre of food and water. The Philippine vessel was grounded in 1999 and has served as a permanent outpost since then.
Since 2022, we have submitted about 245 diplomatic protests. In 2025 alone, we submitted 47. So this time, the National Security Council will be submitting to DFA the findings of NBI and the other supporting documents to substantiate a diplomatic protest.
In response, the Chinese Foreign Ministry says the allegation lacks credibility and is not worth refuting. MOFA added that it is the presence of the Philippine Navy vessel Sierra Madre that had caused severe damage to the marine environment. Well, another break's up next, but coming up, the race to the moon is back in focus. Artemis 2 marking a key U.S. step ahead of a manned lunar landing they aim to achieve in 2 years. China targets their own crewed landing before 2030. We take a close look at the growing space rivalry. Japan will stop accepting new foreign workers in the food services sector starting today. Well, the move comes as the number of visa holders in the restaurant industry under Japan's specified skilled worker system nears its quota. Well, CNA's senior correspondent Michio Ishida has this report.
This chain restaurant serving Indian and Pakistani cuisine has 5 outlets in Tokyo, and all its 20 staff are foreigners from South Asia. Its owner has been worried about the impact on his business since he found out about the suspension of new foreign worker applications just on Monday.
困りますよ。やっぱりね、食事なんでやっぱりちゃんとした専門的な人がいないと作れないじゃないですか。コックが一番店としては一番大事ですから。
It's a similar story at this Korean restaurant in the capital, which has workers from Korea, China, and Nepal.
これから結構新しく人を使うのには大変だね。今も大変なのよ。もう時間の制限があるし。
Under Japan's specified skilled worker program, its food services industry can hire up to some 50,000 foreign staff for 5 years through fiscal year 2028. As of end of February, there were about 46,000 such employees. New applications are now halted, as officials warn the sector will hit its limit as soon as May. An agent that helps businesses bring in foreign workers says the impact could spread to even the healthcare industry.
総勢は多分1000人を超えるかなとは思います。メインは7割以上が介護です。一昨年から急に外食が増えて、で、増えた外食っていうのが日本だと介護施設の食堂も外食で入れたもので、
As Japan's population ages, its workforce is shrinking, especially in the rural areas, causing acute labor shortages. One restaurant in Takayama in Gifu Prefecture says the government move will be a big blow since they have a smaller pool of workers to tap, including foreign students.
外食の経営者としては非常に頭を悩ましているっていうのが正直な気持ちです。地方における枠の人数とか、都心における枠の人数とか、その一律で全国のじゃなくてですね、地方創生にとって人手は確実に必要ですので。
In Japan, the number of foreign residents jumped by nearly 10% last year, exceeding the 4 million mark for the first time in end 2025, and more than 60% are part of the workforce. Official figures show the number of foreign workers hit a record 2.57 million as of end of October. As demand for foreign workers rises, one NGO says it's monitoring the impact of the immigration caps.
この上限で実態見合っていなかったんじゃないかというような議論をですね、業界で行うだとか、労働団体で行うというようなことをですね、事前にやるべきだったんだろうと思います。経済界が一つは黙ってはいないわけですよ。だからそこのところがこれからちょっと私たちもよく見ているところなんですけども。
The government is also looking at a broader review of its immigration policy, a development businesses and analysts will be watching closely. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
The world marked the International Day of Human Spaceflight on Sunday, a timely reminder of how fast that competition is accelerating. Well, the moon is emerging as a new front in US-China rivalry. Both sides are not just planning missions, but shaping the future of human activity beyond Earth. Well, NASA's Artemis II mission has sent astronauts farther into deep space than ever before. It flew past the moon, setting the stage for a US crewed landing as early as 2028. Well, the planned return, more than half a century after Apollo, signals Washington's renewed push in human space exploration. Well, that progress is being closely watched in Beijing. China is aiming to land its own astronauts on the moon before 2030. Now, it's developing a full mission architecture, including the Long March 10 rocket, Mingzhou spacecraft, and Lanyue lunar lander. Recent milestones from lunar sample returns to space station operations point to steady advances. And of course, this goes beyond just national prestige. The competition spans entire space systems, from heavy lift launch and deep space navigation to lunar orbit, docking, as well as precision landing. And beyond that, the ability to build and sustain operations on the moon, including communications, power systems, and the potential use of resources like water and ice. Now, there is also a race to set the rules. The US is expanding its Artemis Accords, while China and Russia are developing a rival international lunar research station. So the contest is somewhat shifting. It is no longer about who gets there first, but who can stay longer, do more, and bring others into their orbit. A rivalry that could shape and influence in the next phase of space competition. Well, to help us make sense of all of it, we are joined now by Victoria Sampson, Chief Director for Space Security and Stability at Secure World Foundation, speaking to us all the way from Washington. Well, thanks, Victoria, for joining us. So let's just start with a big picture question. What some observers are saying, this is a new US-China space race. When they are saying that, what exactly are they talking about?
Well, it's really interesting because we're seeing discussions about who can get back to the moon or who can get to the moon first. And on the US side, very much the discussion is, well, we need to beat the Chinese there. We need to make sure we get there first and set the norms and everything. But from the Chinese side, while obviously I think the US options are consideration, they really don't mention the US at all. They're just focusing more on, hey, we're going to get a person on the moon by 2030. We're going to do the International Lunar Research Station by 2035. They don't talk about competition at all in regards to what they're planning on doing.
So obviously, this goes beyond just rockets and moonshots. So, this is also about science exploration, but how much of that versus prestige, influence, technological leadership, that sort of thing?
Well, I don't think you can differentiate national prestige from scientific exploration. That's been a feature of the space race from the very beginning. You look at the Cold War origins from the US and the Soviet Union trying to get to a man on the moon first. That was also tied into ICBM development. It was tied into trying to prove one way of life was better than the other, and that's being echoed in today's space race. But definitely, you have the US's led Artemis Accords, which 61 countries have signed on in terms of regarding like how they view peaceful exploration and the use of space. Whereas China and Russia, they have the International Lunar Research Station, which is not quite the same, but kind of roughly equivalent. They've had about 13 countries sign on. So if you're looking at in terms of establishing norms, it looks like the Artemis Accords, which is pulling from the Outer Space Treaty, which many countries have signed, might have the upper leg in terms of getting more countries to sign on to their vision.
So back to China's ambitions again, they seem to have a very specific benchmark in sight, 2030, hoping to crew a lunar landing then. So what are some of the key milestones you'd be watching out for to gauge whether that goal is realistic or not?
Well, they've got a couple uncrewed missions planned in the next couple of years. Chang'e 7 is going to be later on this year, and Chang'e 8 is going to be next year, looking to do landings on the moon and try and figure out, okay, can they do these soft landings and be able to hit the parts of the moon, the South Pole, roughly where a lot of countries looking at doing, just because there's thought to be lunar ice in the craters there, which could be used for fuel and for human habitation, things like that. So that's what we're looking at the next couple of years, really if they can achieve those couple of missions.
So beyond the moon, Victoria, events on Earth are also changing the stakes here. And I'm curious to know your take on how do you see the war in Iran shaping US-China space ambitions?
That's a really good question. I think what's going on with the war in Iran, it's shaping how a lot of countries are viewing the U.S.'s capability to carry out things that it says it wants to do. It's shaping how countries view the United States military capabilities, how they view our financial capabilities, how they view our ability to get countries to sign on to our mission, how we treat our allies and partners. Frankly, it's not looking well for the United States. So I think that it overall will shape how other countries want to sign on to work with the United States on things of a grand nature, such as a lunar mission. And I really believe the adversaries of China will look at that and say, okay, the United States can't do everything it says it wants to do on Earth. What does that mean for in space as well?
Also, Victoria, another concern that you've raised is how blurred the boundaries in space are becoming. So you've argued that civil, commercial, military space are becoming more intertwined. Where do you think in that space creates the greatest danger when it comes to US-China rivalry?
Well, the concern is if you have the blurring line between civil and military space, between commercial and military space, there's the option for inadvertent escalation, where you have maybe a commercial activity that is meant to be entirely devolved from the U.S. government, can be perceived as something that the U.S. government is involved in, and could lead to something of that nature. And so the concern I have is that if you have a combination or like a perception of the commercial and military space, conflict, an inadvertent escalation of conflict on space could lead to conflict on Earth. And anytime you have nuclear armed adversaries where there is incomplete information, where there is a lack of communication, where there's a possibility of misunderstanding, that can escalate very quickly. And of course, no one wants that.
And of course, the policy question then becomes even more urgent at a time like this. We're seeing what's happening in Iran. So if policymakers can perhaps take away one lesson from both the, U.S.-China rivalry and crises like Iran as well, what do you think that would be?
Well, I think policymakers should look and see, if the United States is a reliable partner, if it has a financial backup to what it says it's going to do, if it can deliver in terms of what it technologically says it can do. I think that would be the lesson I would be taking away if I were allies and partners in the United States from what's going on in Iran today.
So I'll talk about your recent work about counter space capabilities and pointing to the growth of it. So when you've got a crisis like Iran, basically, sharpening the military value of satellites for missile warning, surveillance, communications, that sort of thing, how much does that raise the risk of space becoming part of the conflict itself?
So my organization, the Secure World Foundation, we look at global counter space capabilities, the idea that there are capabilities or technologies being developed that could deny, degrade, disrupt, destroy, or somehow interfere with someone's access to or use of space. And so the conflict in Iran has been, a case in point that what we've been seeing for some time is that we're seeing non-destructive ways of interfering with access to use of space. So looking at jamming, looking at spoofing, looking at cyber capabilities, things of that nature. So I think definitely that's something to keep an eye on, as well as you're looking at commercial actors whose imagery is being used in an active military conflict that makes them lawful targets, which I think many commercial actors haven't really considered. They're like, well, hey, we're just trying to make some money here. They didn't actually understand that they were being considered that legally they could be targeted. And so I think it really broadens the scope of what could be considered a conflict in space. And that's not just government actors or national actors, it could be commercial actors as well.
Oh, thanks for helping us unpack this all. Really appreciate your insights there. Victoria Sampson, Chief Director for Space Security and Stability at Secure World Foundation. And for more of our space-related coverage, do log on to cna.asia or a mobile app for commentaries such as this one on how the Artemis missions are more than just about planting a flag on the moon. And afraid we have run out of time for this Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. And don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And look us up on all socials, including Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching as always.